In a time when the unusual and the distinctly peculiar were labeled as witches, believed to be followers of the devil, those who displayed clear signs of madness were thought to be possessed by the demons lurking inside them. In a world where the line between the supernatural and the human mind blurred, witches were seen as complicit in dark forces, actively serving the devil's will. In contrast, lunatics were viewed as tragic souls, unwittingly ensnared by malevolent spirits, their possession a source of both fear and pity. In the time of ancient Egypt, near the temple of Saturn, in classic Greece, with the Asclepieia, and under the laws of pagan Rome, those who faced mental afflictions were met with compassion. Though lacking the advancements of modern science, their treatment was grounded in the same fundamental principles we embrace today. Under the gentle embrace of the eastern sun, the lives of the people unfolded in the great outdoors. As we explore the narratives found in sacred texts and travelogues, one might encounter the madman residing among the graves. He could meander through the tranquil cypress groves beneath the moon's gentle glow, or recline under the sheltering palm during the sweltering midday sun. He lived in isolation, much like the outcast, severed from the bonds of rationality by his profound affliction. Yet he found solace in the embrace of the open sky, and sunlight often granted a unique freedom, as one under divine protection. However, the erratic behavior that often accompanied those in his state could provoke a fierce response, leading to swift and severe consequences for their actions. In Europe, particularly in England, the less dangerous individuals deemed mad were permitted to roam freely, often becoming subjects of amusement and ridicule. Shakespeare provides a striking portrayal of poor Tom, who consumes the swimming frog, the toad, the tadpole, the wall newt, and the water newt. In his fury, he resorts to eating cow dung for sustenance, swallowing old rats and ditch dogs, and drinking from the murky waters of the slimy pool. He is subjected to punishment, being whipped from place to place, and faces imprisonment. In those times, many endured great suffering, and it is likely that some, disregarding the harsh laws of the world, succumb to the overwhelming urge that often haunts the minds of the troubled. Through this, nature may have shown mercy, guiding the most tormented souls away from a world to which they felt they never truly belonged. Yet while the less fortunate among the impoverished were permitted to roam freely, those belonging to the wealthier class found themselves in a more precarious situation. Their families felt a deep sense of shame and reluctance, leading to their concealment in hidden spaces, locked away in garrets and cellars, or isolated in sheds and outhouses, secured in any corner of the property. In the realm of ancient remedies, there existed a variety of concoctions intended for those deemed insane, some of which could very well have found their way into the enigmatic cauldron of witches. Among the more palatable ingredients were the flesh of wolves and lions. Our Saxon ancestors, known for their expertise in herbalism, recommended an array of plants, including clovewort, polion, and peony. The mandrake, with its uncanny resemblance to the human figure, became the centerpiece of numerous tales, steeped in mystery and intrigue. It was said, for foolishness that is, for the affliction of the devil or possession by demons, take from the body of the same plant, mandrake, weighing 3 pennies. Administer it in warm water, as he finds suitable. He will soon be cured. Throughout history, societies have shown a profound concern for those who are more profoundly affected by madness. In the early days of Christianity, communities took it upon themselves to care for these individuals within the sacred spaces of their churches. Here, they were given a designated area and provided with sustenance, as these places became their primary refuge and home. The monks, in their own way, provided care within the walls of their monasteries. Yet despite any medicines or remedies they might have used, the prevailing belief of the time was that madness stemmed from the influence of demons. The mission was to expel the malevolent forces. In their quest for resolution, they appear to have turned to a myriad of unconventional remedies, both ethereal and tangible. Throughout history, the powerful tool in their arsenal has consistently been exorcism. This was the fundamental expression of all faiths, and it was also embraced by the early Christians. In the 3rd century, a distinct order of exorcists emerged. It is noted that upon ordination, an exorcist is presented by the bishop with a book containing the prescribed forms of exorcism. These forms were specific passages accompanied by invocations in the name of Christ, commanding the unclean spirit to leave the possessed individual. This tradition has persisted through the ages, inspiring countless legends and artworks about saints and scholars from the medieval period. While the practice may appear to have diminished, the fundamental concept of exorcism remains very much alive. It is essential to grasp this as we delve into the narrative. For example, when we encounter the notion that water and salt are exorcised by the priest, thereby liberating them from the influence of Satan, who, since the fall, has tainted and misused even the lifeless elements. Yet, alongside the mystical and spiritual tools wielded by the Church, there existed others of a more tangible nature. The patients found themselves tied to revered crosses at dusk, only to be freed as healed by dawn. They were securely fastened to stones within different churches, immersed in sacred wells, a tradition that persisted in Cornwall into contemporary times. Additionally, they embarked on pilgrimages to various shrines, where they often experienced a structured regimen of care, with music frequently playing a significant role. More extreme remedies were also available, drawing not solely on the saints' power, but also on the frailties of the devils. Amidst the myriad of herbal concoctions and the bizarre, unpalatable mixtures recommended for madness, we encounter a rather striking remedy. If a man is deemed a lunatic, take the skin of a mirror swine or porpoise, fashion it into a whip, and administer a good thrashing. Soon he shall be cured. Amen. In one monastery, it is reported that the individuals under the care of the monks endured 10 lashes each day. The afflicted have faced punishment for a multitude of reasons. 1. Out of superstition, in an attempt to expel evil spirits or ward off illness. 2. For therapeutic purposes, as the infliction of pain and shock could sometimes quiet the tumultuous thoughts of the individuals, albeit briefly. 3. Instinctively, as a means of alleviating the emotional strain on their caretakers. The harsh realities of medical practices and the severe punishments we will encounter again later, long after the era of relentless torment had ceased. Yet it persisted throughout Christendom for likely more than 16 centuries. To grasp it fully, we must divert our attention to those living in a more primal state. Early societies, much like young ones, imbued everything with personality. Disease took on a character of its own, much like the treacherous vision sent by Zeus to Agamemnon, a thing that could be drawn out in an unseen form. then either cast into flames or submerged in water, an unseen adversary, yet so human in its frailties that it could be thwarted by mere thorns placed in its way. If various physical ailments were perceived as manifestations of personal demons, then the terrifying and enigmatic condition of insanity would surely be seen as a direct sign of a devil's influence and intervention. Furthermore, for the primitive mind, these demons were far too close, too vividly imagined, too tangible, and too ordinary to be considered spiritual entities in the contemporary sense of the term. They were envisioned as clearly alive and in motion, embodying a distinctly human essence. In the beliefs of primitive cultures, it is thought that the spirits of the deceased can be harmed, just like any living being. This perspective allows for the idea that malevolent entities can be chased from homes and banished to the wilderness and shadows beyond. The beliefs of the deeply superstitious medieval period mirrored these notions. Even the formidable adversary, often depicted as the accuser, was portrayed by Milton in a role reminiscent of Ahriman, yet in the collective consciousness he remained a pitiable figure, a mere wretch. He is continually outwitted like the pantomime policeman, 653, and nonplussed by the shallowest equivocations. 654. He beats a man. 655, and is beaten and vanquished. 656. He aims a stone at Dunstan and misses. 657. And when seized by the nose with pincers, his bellowings are heard for 3 miles round. 658. He howls when sprinkled with holy water. 659. And Luther hurls an inkstand at his head. 660. This man-like and material monster, of course, felt pain, and when he took up his abode in a human body, he was supposed to feel the blows inflicted on the sufferer. 661. It was the devil, or his representative, who might be driven out of a man or woman. The demons could be commanded to quit each portion of the invaded body, member by member. 662. The fiends were supposed to writhe in anguish. 663, when the possessed cowered beneath salt water or the whip. 664. On them the curses and the stripes were meant to descend. 665, until at last, through unendurable torments, they fled the body by the nearest orifice. 666. This raw and primal method of driving out devils persisted for a considerable time. The belief in it likely lingers in the thoughts of certain rural inhabitants. Hawthorne, reflecting on the Puritans of the 17th century, presents a jailer who remarks of his captive, "Truly, she has seemed like one under a spell, and it would not take much for me to attempt to cast out the devil from her with punishment." Yet there were moments when such attempts at exorcism faltered, and the whip offered no remedy. Then those deemed insane would need to be confined and put through a form of treatment, though describing it as ill treatment would be more accurate. Undoubtedly, their focus was on calming the more challenging patients and restoring a sense of order, if not a return to rationality. In the words of Andrew Boord from his peculiar regiment of health, I advise every man who is mad, lunatic, frantic, or possessed to be kept safe in a secluded house or chamber where there is little light, and that he has a keeper whom the madman fears. This sentiment is echoed in Shakespeare's words, "We'll have him in a dark room and bound," which reflects the immediate response to madness. Silenced and restrained, they found themselves in various forms and locations, held captive by family, monks, and guardians. Throughout history, countless individuals faced execution under the guise of witchcraft or wrongdoing, often finding themselves confined in gatehouses and prisons. These places became arenas of torment, providing grim entertainment for fellow inmates. In some instances, they were subdued with drugs to silence their cries and madness. Occasionally, they were admitted to the limited hospitals available, sharing space with those suffering from fevers and injuries. As time passed and communities expanded, it became clear that the traditional retreats were no longer sufficient. The ranks of the unhinged were swelling, and the entire nation was becoming more confined and insular. The practice of moving swiftly from one location to another lost its efficacy, and the only available public institutions were monasteries, prisons, and hospitals. In 1247, the Priory of St. Mary of Bedlam was established near Bishopsgate, where individuals suffering from mental illness were housed and cared for, at least from the year 1403 onwards. Undoubtedly, there emerged various locations repurposed for specific uses, including St. Catherine's by the Tower, known for housing individuals deemed to be of a more troubled nature. However, it wasn't until the mid-18th century that stark and foreboding structures began to rise, designed to confine those considered problematic. As Dr. Connolly noted, these facilities were nothing short of prisons of the most deplorable kind. Small openings in the walls, whether unglazed or adorned with glass, are secured by robust iron bars. The narrow corridors lead to dark cells and desolate courts, devoid of any tree, shrub, flower, or blade of grass. There exists a profound sense of isolation, or a companionship so indiscriminate that it feels more oppressive than solitude itself, accompanied by fearsome attendants, wielding whips and free to impose manacles and chains and stripes at their own brutal will. Uncleanness, semi-starvation, the garrote, and unpunished murders. These were the characteristics of such buildings throughout Europe. The theoretical treatment was troubling enough. For those beyond the reach of healing, control becomes essential. This notion was embraced by Boerhaave and Cullen, the latter noting that fear, as a powerful emotion, can temper excessive excitement. He observed that fear could counteract the heightened states of anger and agitation often seen in individuals experiencing mania, suggesting that their vulnerability to fear might be more pronounced than anticipated, making it a valuable tool in managing such conditions. There was a desire to instill a sense of fear, and it was stated that at times this could be achieved through harsh measures. This refers to the previously mentioned practice of punitive discipline. Methods such as shock, terror, physical pain, and restraint were documented as approaches to remedy the troubled workings of the mind. In the pages of the Gentleman's Magazine from 1765, we encounter a chilling account of private asylums where individuals were forcibly taken, lacking any legal authority. They were seized by a group of merciless individuals trained in this cruel trade, stripped of their dignity, and confined to dark rooms. The understanding of insanity during that era was so limited that the brutal treatment inflicted upon private patients extended even to the king himself. Mr. Massey reflects on the practices of the 18th century, noting, mental disease was at that time a branch of art little understood, and the specific treatment of lunatics was worthy of the barbarous age of medicine. The afflicted individual, King George III, who had been struck by this dreadful fate, was no longer treated as a person deserving of compassion. His body was swiftly confined within a device, restricting any freedom of movement. At times he found himself bound to a staple. He endured frequent beatings and starvation, held in a state of subjugation through threatening and aggressive words. It is undeniable that, like many individuals deemed unstable, he could be quite bothersome. There was a time he spoke non-stop for 19 hours. His struggles were compounded by harsh treatment. He was left vulnerable to the whims of a German servant, and the initial physicians even barred him from seeing his own children, a situation that caused him great distress. Thus unfolded the conventional approach taken against one of the most esteemed figures in the realm. Yet the most heinous acts unfolded within the confines of impenetrable barriers. Rational individuals, Beach notes, discussing private institutions, were often imprisoned in these asylums, as people frequently exploited the systems in place to eliminate a bothersome family member or to achieve some self-serving goal. And what of those who are truly insane, prone to agitation, exhibiting bursts of aggression, displaying erratic behavior, feeling powerless, often lacking control over bodily functions just as much as over mental processes? One can envision the dire circumstances that unfolded when they were entrusted to the care of untrained individuals and harsh caretakers, equipped with chains and tools of confinement at their disposal. Isolated from all family and friends, they suffered in pain and lived in filth. Occasionally, often on Monday mornings following the Sabbath and its aftermath, they would be taken outside to a yard where they were washed down with cold water from buckets, even in the harshest of weather. The state of the living rooms and wards was frequently so dire that visitors would often feel physically ill upon entering. However, such occurrences were uncommon in those private prisons, where outsiders were seldom welcome beyond the walls. In the year 1777, York Asylum emerged as a notorious site, later consumed by flames in 1814, allegedly to prevent revelations that could implicate its caretakers. By 1813, a strict regulation was established. No individual could visit the patients without a specific written authorization from the physician. Generally, official visitors posed little threat, yet at York, they were shielded from the most troubling areas. In many smaller asylums, such places were entirely off-limits. Throughout the 18th century, and well into the 19th, the grand public asylums stood as grim testaments to the cruelty and neglect that permeated their walls. The unfortunate patients were confined to straw in their cells or strapped to wooden shelves that held them captive. Numerous individuals were either unclothed or covered with a single blanket. Within the wards, they were often restrained to the wall by their wrists or ankles, and sometimes by both. At Bedlam, there was a formidable figure named Norris. Following a confrontation with an inebriated keeper, he found himself restrained in a heavy iron apparatus sourced from Newgate. This device was connected by a 12-inch chain to a collar encircling his neck, linked to a ring on a vertical iron bar embedded in the wall beside his bed. Additionally, his right leg was fastened to the very frame on which he lay. The outcome was that the patient was able to shift up and down within the limits set by the ring and short chain attached to the upright bar, yet he remained unable to move either foot away from the wall, confined to resting on his back. In this captivity, remarks Dr. Connolly, he had endured for 12 years. Throughout this period, accounts suggest that he engaged in conversation with a sense of reason and clarity. Eventually, a sense of relief arrived, but he only had about a year to savor it. It is disheartening to note that this prolonged suffering received the documented approval of all the hospital authorities. Nothing can more powerfully demonstrate the numbing impact of repeatedly observing brutality and the transformation that occurs within the human heart when granted unchecked authority. The physicians received meager compensation, leading to a corresponding lack of attention to their duties. During the period we are discussing, the transition from the 18th to the 19th century, the physician at Bedlam earned a mere £100 annually, yet he managed to maintain a private asylum and would occasionally be absent from the public institution for extended periods. One of the surgeons is noted for being generally insane and mostly drunk, yet he remained in his position for a decade, in a time marked by a troubling disregard for the vulnerable. The absence of spiritual support left patients at the mercy of their carers. These individuals, often lacking the necessary understanding, became frustrated and harsh, overwhelmed by the challenges posed by those in their care. The dynamics of power and ignorance created a grim reality for the afflicted, highlighting a poignant chapter in the history of medical treatment. Instinctive and retaliatory floggings, assaults, and potentially even murders were not uncommon, alongside the distressing and unending restraints previously mentioned. One doctor devised and implemented a unique instrument designed to pry open patients' mouths during mandatory feeding. He notes that, through the common method, teeth were likely to be damaged, leaving some individuals without a front tooth in either jaw. 723. In the 18th century, particularly up to 1770, and in some regions even beyond, individuals experiencing mental illness were viewed as curiosities. People would pay to tour asylums, much like modern audiences flock to observe wild animals. The more unscrupulous among the visitors would provoke and intentionally upset the confined patients, reminiscent of how descendants continue to taunt caged creatures today. This led to disturbing displays of madness, which have since vanished, as they stemmed not solely from illness but from the exacerbation of suffering due to poor treatment. Such behavior seemed to be widespread during that era. In Geneva, some individuals deemed insane were offered grass and grotesque items to entertain onlookers. At the Bicêtre, as well as in various regions of Germany, a remarkable phenomenon unfolded. Les Fous de Charenton gained a reputation for their theatrical performances, which were characterized by a striking intensity and spectacle, drawing in audiences captivated by their sheer absurdity. In the year 1811, they faced a prohibition. For years, shadows loomed behind high walls, yet inevitably, light found its way through. In 1793, a pivotal moment arrived when Pinel liberated the patients at Bicêtre from their chains. Within the confines of the York Asylum, a place previously mentioned, a sinister reputation began to take root. In 1788, the Reverend William Mason expressed his concerns regarding the situation. By 1791, friends of a female patient sought to visit her, but their request was denied on the grounds that she was not fit to be seen by outsiders, likely a valid concern. A few weeks later, news of her death emerged. This woman was a member of the Society of Friends, and the dubious circumstances surrounding her confinement stirred significant discontent among the Quakers. Not long after, William Tuke made a determined decision that they would establish a hospital of their own. The retreat began its journey in 1792, quickly distinguishing itself with its compassionate and progressive approaches, especially when compared to the cruel and hidden practices that dominated the older establishment. As time passed, countless patients endured suffering and ultimately met their fate. In the year 1813, Samuel Tuke, the grandson of the retreat's founder, published a small volume detailing the practices and principles of the institution. It sparked widespread fascination and, indeed, accomplished what all the skills and community dedication of Mason and his companions had been unable to achieve. It produced even more remarkable outcomes. A seemingly harmless excerpt from this book ignited the ire of the physician at York Lunatic Asylum. A letter he published in a local newspaper sparked a heated debate among the governors of the institution. This controversy unfolded over nearly 2 years, culminating in August 1814 with the total dismantling of the existing system and the removal of all asylum officers, save for the physician himself. The struggle was embraced by others and continued onwards. As the year 1813 drew to a close, a notable incident of purported misconduct emerged, brought to light by Mr. Godfrey Higgins, a magistrate serving the West Riding. The statement from Higgins was presented before a gathering of 27 governors, following which the accused servants of the house were summoned and sworn in. They solemnly swore that the allegations were untrue. No further evidence was presented, nor was there any record made of the testimonies given by the servants. The resolution that follows was adopted. The governors, having reflected on the reports circulated in the York and other newspapers regarding the care of William Vickers, who was recently a patient in this asylum, are in complete agreement that he received every possible measure of care, attention, and compassion. Yet despite these efforts, 13 gentlemen from the county stepped forward with their donations, thereby qualifying themselves as governors. The arrival of these new individuals wielded significant influence, compelling an inquiry to take place. Despite the old group of wrongdoers evading true justice and allegedly resorting to arson to hide their misdeeds, they were ultimately ousted from their positions. This led to a widespread investigation that captured the attention of the nation. In the year 1814, a significant moment unfolded as Mr. George Rose introduced a bill aimed at regulating asylums, a proposal that successfully navigated its way through the House of Commons. However, the officials at Bedlam resisted the initiative, expending more than £600 in the process. They had a compelling reason, as we will soon discover. The governors of the York Asylum, a group of 19 that included the Archbishop, submitted a petition opposing the matter at hand. In contrast, the courageous Mr. Higgins put forth a petition in support, bearing his own signature. Ultimately, the House of Lords rejected the bill, prompting the appointment of a committee within the House of Commons. This committee gathered the shocking and unimaginable evidence that we have referenced. In 1815, Mr. Rose presented a report that stirred the public's conscience. Although the committee at Bedlam cleared its officials of any wrongdoing, including the horrifying device used on Norris, the collective outrage of the people could not be ignored. This wave of indignation led to significant changes, addressing many of the most egregious abuses that had persisted. In 1818, Mr. Rose passed away, yet the subsequent year saw Mr. Wynne introducing another bill. This initiative faced opposition from Lord Eldon, who remarked that there could not be a more false humanity than over-humanity, with regard to persons afflicted with insanity. This perspective is one we will revisit later. That bill met the same destiny as its forerunner. 9 years later, in 1828, Mr. Gordon finally achieved the passing of an act aimed at enhancing the asylums. Despite the ongoing abuses well into the mid-19th century, and the introduction of numerous acts of Parliament, the horrific wrongs we have discussed persisted as crimes rather than mere customs, albeit on a significantly reduced scale. In the year 1838, at Lincoln Asylum, Dr. Gardner Hill took a significant step by eliminating mechanical restraints. The following year, Dr. Connolly continued this progressive approach at Hanwell. In this context, they found themselves, naturally, at odds within the field, yet fresh ideas and innovative perspectives were emerging, continuing to influence the approach to mental health treatment. Throughout history, the mind and the body have been viewed as distinct entities. People had stopped believing in the influence of evil spirits, yet they referred to it in ambiguous terms as a diseased mind. With frequently no visible injury to identify, the prevailing belief appeared to be validated that it, mental disorder, was an unfathomable and thus an unhealable affliction of the mind. In the early 19th century, a medical writer might reference lectures he had participated in, where a physician proclaimed that treatment and medicine were ineffective for furor uterinus, asserting it was a condition rooted in the mind rather than the body. Undoubtedly, the shadow of free will and theology cast a sense of apprehension. Dr. Halliday observes that numerous capable individuals, swayed by what seemed to be the prevailing views of society, hesitated to delve deeply into a topic that could challenge the notion of the mind's immateriality, a truth they felt was self-evident and firmly supported by divine revelation. We shall not wander into complexities or strive to define what mind truly signifies. Yet, it is understood that within the limits of our current understanding, the mind operates solely through the body. The origins of its formation and the possibility of its revival are crucial inquiries that may remain unanswered. For now, they exist outside our grasp. Slowly but surely, the exploration of tangible evidence led to a departure from metaphysical and ethical notions. Derangement, a writer from the 19th century observes, is now viewed not as a malady of the mind, but rather as an affliction of the central nervous system, which is essential for the proper functioning of the intellect. The brain bears the blame, not the mind. The outdated belief, Dr. Winter states, that mental disturbances can occur without any damage to the thinking apparatus, being either the cause or the result, has been thoroughly debunked. The underlying cause of madness slowly gained recognition. The exploration of its mental phenomena was conducted with greater scrutiny, revealing connections to other mental states that had previously not been classified as insanity in the strictest sense. Until now, the standards for defining insanity were quite primitive, and the evidence presented was often vague and based on common perceptions. However, once it became widely accepted that insanity is a medical condition that specialists in the field understand deeply, the significance of expert testimony grew substantially, becoming a central element in every case thereafter. The evolving perspectives on mental health clashed with the traditional, rigid interpretations upheld by the legal system, sparking a debate within the realm of criminal law that remains unresolved, particularly in England. The urge for revenge was not easily held back by logic or evidence of lack of accountability. by advocating for the notion of freedom of choice in every conceivable physical condition, and by asserting full accountability for individuals regardless of the circumstances. The judges positioned themselves firmly. They chose to acknowledge only the most extreme and evident states of abnormality, those that would leave a person completely unaware of their actions and environment, thereby safeguarding their own authority. In this context, the emerging theories faced skepticism and ridicule, as inconsistent criteria for sanity were established, contradicting established facts and expert testimony. Some argued that the intricate and astonishing manifestations of madness or abnormality identified by the experts were merely fresh labels for age-old vices. Others maintained that no physical condition should absolve one from responsibility. Smollett expressed a desire for all individuals who commit serious crimes to face the standard consequences dictated by the law. In response, Mr. Tuke notes that the complete failure to differentiate between voluntary and involuntary actions, the interplay between intentions and outcomes, is vividly illustrated. Regrettably, this was not an unusual occurrence for Smollett. Moreover, I should mention that this innate sensation persisted, much like all things that are instinctual tend to do. As we delve into the writings of a contemporary author from 1908, we encounter the intriguing notion. In recent times, a particular group of intellectuals, I've begun to formulate some ideas regarding the accountability, or lack thereof, of numerous dangerous criminals and murderers, which have rightly been challenged by more pragmatic observers. The author goes on with an endearing naivety. Even those residing in mental health facilities are aware of the difference between right and wrong. This understanding forms the very foundation upon which the governance and regulation of these institutions are constructed. Therefore, no concepts regarding criminal irresponsibility should allow for any leniency in the security and rigor of detaining dangerous individuals, regardless of their mental state, be it sane, partially insane, or completely mad. It is crucial to recognize that the treatment and circumstances surrounding even the most heinous offenders should not be presented in a way that entices others. Yet the stark realities remained undeniable. Alas, the injustice and cruelty inflicted upon the weak and helpless persist, and with a steady rhythm, Mrs. Stowe reveals the undeniable consequences faced by nations. Yet the evident inaccuracies of past beliefs and the persistent shortcomings of outdated practices could not remain concealed through the passage of time. Gradually, the illumination of knowledge started to reach the shadowy corners of retribution. The completely insane were initially saved and cared for as patients, and now, fortunately, they no longer occupy our thoughts. Their situation pertains to medicine, not to criminology. In relation to the half-mad, we find ourselves navigating a gradual evolution and transformation. Their misdeeds, long recognized by the experts, are now being presented to those who create the laws. Crime, states the report of Mr. Secretary Gladstone's committee. Its causes and treatment has been the focus of extensive and thoughtful investigation. Numerous challenges it showcases are, at this moment, virtually unsolvable. It is possible that certain individuals who commit crimes are beyond redemption, much like some illnesses resist treatment. In these instances, it seems reasonable to consider the notion that criminal behavior stems from a condition, a consequence of inherent flaws in one's physical being. Yet the field of criminal anthropology remains in its infancy. When it comes to the abnormal, we find ourselves merely at the beginning of understanding justice. America